finally getting to Survey LM. Also, we had just anyone else online or coming in. We do have later today the trivia as well, so hopefully we see you guys there. Jen's done a really good job putting that one together. So
I'm not.
So we'll see whether there are more people in the trivia than now.
I think there's a lot more people coming.
Trivia has alcohol, so I get it. It's all good. So just to keep an eye on that, you got that coming later. So just going straight into it and picking up from where we went last time at, I don't even know what the slide is, 58. The Survey LM sort of methodology, again, just maybe just quick recap. We've been talking about generative AI and the use of like large language models and augmented language models for sort of simulating or emulating human-like behavior and you know, feeding in profiles of people based on existing data or things like that, or creating new sort of profiles to then simulate them in pretty sort of like flexible way, question, answer, instruction, whatever you can fit into that. We talked a lot about the actual underlying mechanisms of the models and the sequence-to-sequence prediction stuff. We talked about the global knowledge, the Hayek sort of argument, and you know, what does it mean for say using one knowledge base over the other. Different model providers have different training, safety mechanisms, guardrails, plus also different training sets as well. So, you know, if I'm training on Reddit data versus, I don't know, Mums and Bubs forum, I'm probably going to get some nasty behavior out of the Reddit one. Mums and Bubs, they're probably a little bit nicer and a bit more about feelings, and sorry, maybe making assumptions there, but it could also be that we're talking about nasty little kids, so we don't know. So it's the what am I trying to say? It's like you just be aware of you know, the underlying factors of the model that you choose. OpenAI will be different in that sense to the Anthropics, to the NVIDIAs, all their own sort of agent architectures, which we have been through in the previous presentation. So all the recordings are available. Jen, reach out to Jen if you need any there. So finally getting into Survey LM and the simulation process, like how do we actually use Survey LM? And we'll try and get into some hands-on stuff today using some crowd-funded ideas here. The simulation process, like two, you know, sort of blocks, I suppose. We might just be thinking about like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there, like profile upload. Let's get rid of that. Like, you know, upload your profiles of your agents, upload your survey or your experiment file, execute, collect the data, revise the survey if you want it. Yeah, cool. But there's also 3 steps beforehand. So thinking about like Ben here, the question that he's always going to ask is what's your research question, your hypothesis? What are you actually testing? What do you want to know? You can design all this cool stuff like surveys, scenarios, experiments, very big nets.
I just want to solve problems.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we need to know what we're solving first, or what we're trying to answer, right? That's going to inform your method, and that flows all the way down through to you know, your survey setup and you know, the profiles that you need. You know, things about representativeness and relevancy of different characteristics for your context. So. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, but ABC too. So assuming that we've followed Ben's advice and we've gone through and we know what we're actually caring about, I'm just going to assume that we do know that for now, and we'll continue. With building agents, so synthetic profiles, there's a few different sort of techniques or approaches which we roughly touch on. Again, fine tuning. You know, based on here's the real data from, say, everyone who's answered the World Value Survey. And I train over that data set to learn to recreate the existing statistical sort of properties within the data. So very much like a direct sort of copy and emulate, or more direct. Then there's also the prompting approach, which is what SurveyLM goes with. Again, you just use the pre-trained models, prompt them in different ways with, say, a profile of a person, so their frustrations, behaviours, goals, personality traits. Put them into your prompt, and simulate what it would be like to be someone like this. Okay, like answer as if you're someone like this. That sort of idea. So 2 prongs. We took that second one with the prompting. The reason being mainly the accessibility of it, and we bypass all that need for fine tuning and things like that as well, which is nice. Saves a bit of money. And
do you have any recommendation in terms of what sort of input data is important to include and which ones you should not include to really then test your core hypothesis? In terms, for example, not including the dependent variable because you want to see how the agents often respond. You want to feed them already in that sense. So
yeah,
any theory or any idea around what to include and what not to include?
Yeah, so I guess if it's like you're thinking, again, anything that you input to the model will bias it. Okay, it's sequence to sequence prediction. If you include unnecessary shit or like, things that are a little bit off topic or not central to your core hypothesis or the question you're asking, you might be introducing some sort of unknowns, I guess, in that or uncertainties. We're doing like sequence prediction. If you're doing temperature equals 0, then you're taking the best predicted sequence. So any additional context which is not core to your hypothesis or the question you're asking is going to be biasing you away from that as well, potentially even unnecessarily. So if you're thinking like left-hand side, right-hand side,
Yes.
Dependence on the left and independence on the right, generally you're asking like answer instruction is where you're getting that dependent variable from. So like, do you choose to exit or stay? In the answer instruction, getting that sort of dependent variable. And then the independent variables on the right-hand side, you can either feed them in as context, agent context, or maybe it's context of the question. Okay, it's up to you which way you want to put it. But for example, like again, I'm Anna Maria. I'm just going to use it's a really good example of she's come up with these 5 or 6 sort of key independent variables around what makes a healthy organization. Maybe it's like good gender balance, qualities of the leader, things like that. These are things that she's found from the literature review. Okay, the predictors or independent variables on the right-hand side. Yeah, so she's feeding them in. Some of them go in the agent context. Some of them go into the scenario itself, where she's doing treatment variations. And the dependent variable there is exit, voice, and last one? Loyalty. So, asking that same question really, just like, do you choose exit, voice, loyalty? Here's the context, the variations, might have a layoff context. The company's going through layoffs, downsizing, whatever. And I might have a treatment variation where I've had some positive feedback. Okay, so like the management. So we've had this context of the layoffs, and management has sort of sat us down and we'll have the big group meeting and told us exactly what's going on and what the plan is and whether or not we're safe. Okay, so they reduce some uncertainty. Okay, left people guessing a little bit less. That variation she also includes on the right-hand side. We're seeing how the variation here, the positive or negative feedback, changes our dependent, which is again voice, loyalty, or exit.
I think her situation is clearer. I'm talking about your situation with the Well-By survey, because that one is a little bit different in the sense that the Well-By survey is actually a survey providing a lot of values that affect, that can help, for example, one inside to build the age characteristics
Yep.
really nicely by doing a lot of value functionalities to a tool, which you often don't have, which is really nice. So you can really nicely calibrate, but you don't want to calibrate too much, because if you want to, for example, cross-validate, you should not include those variables that you want to check for validation.
Yeah.
So where to stop?
Because
So I would do a robustness test by saying you have different kind of specifications with different levels of inputs that you add, and then see, and then do a validation analysis.
Yeah.
Because you want to find out what is the
right?
what is the
Because
sufficient.
mine is more experimental.
Your one is
more different.
Yours is different because there's not a lot of base data in terms of calibration or in terms of validation.
But this is existing.
So your question is, what is the sort of minimum level of sufficient or necessary context or things to fit into
minimum or optimal? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Because
you don't know that properly, so you need to have different specifications, different levels.
But to what extent throwing in redundant stuff there doesn't affect things?
Yeah,
right?
It's a good question.
Like in a regression context, just
intuitively, I'm less worried about redundant stuff. I'm more worried about, in her context, whether you then over-calibrate almost.
Yeah. So
minimum. It's good to understand minimum calibration.
In Katie's example here, I'll just quickly sort of quick overview. There's so one of the approaches with this building up these profiles, you can come up and create them yourself, like sort of like with that Anna Maria example. There's not really that much existing data on the particular problem she's looking at, the question she's looking to answer. She's gone through the literature and she's identified some really good sort of independent variables, the right-hand side ones, to include in the agent context. But then if we go to example another approach with Katie here, we've got existing data, world value survey data, so across like 7 waves or something like that, all 100 and something plus countries in the world. You can actually use those through SurveyLM, use those profiles, like the existing data that you have, to sort of calibrate, I guess, the agent profile. So I use this data set. I might only use age, gender. I've got all these questions, 102, 300 questions I ask each person. I might only include 5 or so the core demographics. I don't know. Do I go to 10? I go age, gender, sort of education. Do I include other things like political views? Maybe it's like a slightly extended context. Like part of her question is how much do we need to represent? How much context do you need about a person to represent them and to represent them faithfully? Now, she's asking 10 questions from the World Value Survey. She's chosen 10 that occur across the waves, or for whatever reason. Should I be feeding those questions into the agent context as well? It's like, do I give them the answer and then ask them for the answer, or do I, maybe that's a validation thing? Do they accurately see that I have the thing? I here's the answer and I just want to recreate that, so I just go look at the agent context. Or if you're doing that, you're overfitting, right? Potentially, yeah, probably.
That's really cool. If you look at the grant that you're in the process of preparing, that we discussed yesterday. Yeah. You could actually not just use, for example, LinkedIn data or so for the common people, but actually use World Value Survey data. Because with World Value Survey, you can actually then have the answers of the people responding to all different kind of questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So you can actually see what's the minimum requirement, as you said, to get as close as possible to the answers of those individuals. And then you can say the dimensionality of the answers. It can be value questions, it can be general attitudes questions.
Using them to verify how close we get to the people of that country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, people. Yeah,
or the people exactly within the data set.
Culture can be driven by, you cluster in the different regions with different cultures.
Yeah.
It's a nice mapping exercise where you really always have an answer of people responding. So you can always check how much do I need to create artificial agents?
Yeah.
How much information do I need to create a relatively proper human?
Yeah.
That's it. So WebAssembly will be really useful.
Yeah, and it's
because with the LinkedIn
validation
data, we
for
don't know,
people.
we still don't know if because you want to go not after the rich, you want fake news, so after the rich and after the general population. So you want to understand how quickly can I create an identity?
Yeah.
Or through an artificial agent.
Yep.
And that the WebAssembly is really good for that.
Yeah, start with that, and then you can talk about other more personalized, because I guess the good thing with for example, the Wikipedia, Wikipedia pages as well, like talk edit pages. I tell a bit of a story about myself, or like GitHub, I tell another story about myself. Facebook, through posts, Instagram, those ones will give you like the hyper personalized sort of things, and I guess it's just maybe it's a little bit more shocking if you can get the it's a bit more of a shock factor, I guess, versus like the world value. But it's good to start there because you know the answers.
Exactly, you know the answer.
Whereas if I'm prompting them with like some profile I've generated out of looking at their posts, Facebook posts, and I'm trying to predict what are they going to say at this time of the year or something like that. It's a bit you're starting to get quite like the measures. Are they yes no? Like computer science loves yes nos.
Yeah. But you can use the narrative in the sense that you take a training data on the Facebook, and then you actually create a conversation that is already available for example, on Facebook.
See how you finish off. Cool.
And then see whether how similar the conversation is. It's more dynamic.
Yeah. Don't like that. Yeah.
One of the starting point probably with the level of required or the specificity of the characteristics or whatever is that one big question is actually the relationship of specificity of the details and the representativeness. Is that monotonic? Then I assume it is. The more you like a kitchen sink, you throw everything in there, it should give you a better representative of the individual.
But do you get lost in the context?
Well, if you get lost, then it's a big problem.
Because there's usually there's always a hole in the middle with the context window.
There's also a lot of aspects. Forgetting, for example, is very important as a human identity.
That's
why
But what should I put at the ends and the starts, like the context?
I mean, you can just not say I build up knowledge space. I build up knowledge. You need to find out a way of adding a forgetting function if you want to get close to humans.
Yep.
So
is that just not a measure of how often any data is repeated?
Yeah, I mean, repetition helps us to keep the knowledge up to a certain point. But I mean, there's some really cool papers on, for example, learning language, and they looked at the efficiency of the algorithm. And they found, for example, those who have forgetting in it, they're actually more efficient in learning a language.
There's a bit of the same intuition behind like sparse encoders as well. Like you're intentionally introducing gaps,
exactly,
or holes too, because we're knowing the human experience is like wholly.
Like SOAR, Alan Newell's SOAR model of the GPS extension of GPS by actually introducing human bugs, under rationality or limited attention, all those kind of factors. It's worth to go back to SOAR as a model and see how do they develop their modeling, and then add those kind of information into our way how we work with knowledge. Because we can play around with the knowledge. What do we feed into it, and what not? And we can use those kind of experiences in past.
Yeah, no, I get you.
That's what I just wrote down. Play with nodes, compare it against the model.
Just to like
dishonest.
Use your question about like Is it about like, because you can obviously like with memory and things like that, like you can repeat things, right? If you have a conversation, like if you're thinking about ChatGPT or something like that, you got one conversation window or whatever they call it, the tabs, and I might repeat something over and over again to keep it in front of mind, or I might have the system message.
No, it's more if you're replicating a human, the way we forget things is basically not repeating them. The circuit will still be there for 7 years. We've just forgotten how to access it.
Okay.
And so if you want to map out what is important, what isn't important to a human by loading it up with all the Facebook data or whatever, how often it's linked to any other idea or how often the relevant data is repeated, be a decent guess as to whether it should be forgotten or not.
Repeated. And the counterfactual on that is important too.
We could then also, based on this idea, we could also start modeling K-lines and start assuming different kind of K-lines and see, and then see what are the consequences of different kind of K-lines that we model. Because this is memory retrieval.
Yeah.
So you can actually just use different kind of memory retrieval models and see what are the consequences.
Yeah.
And then you can see how close you are to a human. And that's almost like an indirect test of K-lines that neuroscientists have not been able to do because they haven't their tools aren't good enough for that. But we can test some of the Minsky stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that worries me in that space with computers is, as Robert said, humans forget stuff. Some of it we put away in long-term memory. And sometimes when we've got good trigger retrieval methods, we can recover old memories very quickly and remember it. Part of the problem with computer systems is it's all in short-term memory and immediately available, right? So you don't have the attrition that you have in a human. So, and that's problematic.
Well, there are like,
for AI models.
RAG is like it's sort of like offloading. Like if I'm offloading my memories to a database, some vector database, embeddings database, that's my memories. I'm sort of like, it's like a longer term and the short term in context window.
Yeah. We
now
can
go search that. I have to go search this database of memories and things like that.
It's been an issue we've had in the IT industry forever on when to archive data, right? It's really what we're talking about here. But this is what happens with children between the ages of 7 to 9 when they go through the trimming process, right? We have no understanding of the algorithms for trimming. Right. So what we have with Survey LM is an untrimmed mind, which is wonderful. But if we're trying to model humans with an untrimmed mind, we don't have a human. We have a system.
Oh, yeah, but we can start training ourselves. That's the beauty.
We can see
the consequence of the training.
Absolutely. And perhaps work down to the perfect agent who looks like me, right? Because what we need is
the perfect agent.
By me, I mean self. I mean by self. Because what we do when we've done this in the past, collected data, is the people who respond to manual surveys come with self. And how we try and remove the bias from different selves is by collecting independent variables on personalities, an obvious one, all sorts of stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But with Survey LM, we actually have to define what that agent looks like. So we have to put that stuff in.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if we just look at personality, if we use the Big 5, right, and we assume we're going to maintain an A and not A covariance matrix, we need a 5x5 covariant. This is getting very big.
Yeah.
And then when we now factor in trust into that dimension, and if you use Julian Rotter's scale, it's 20 just for propensity to trust. We're now up to 20 by 19 or 20 by 20, depending on how you want to define it, right?
Yeah.
Times what we did for personality. So we're starting to get a complex artificial individual.
Do you think that's not human alike?
Well, if it's going to be human-like, it's got to do that, right? Because every one of us has got a head wired differently.
Yeah, like we all got different multiple cells.
That's
like,
correct.
my-
Well, some of us have multiple selves in the same body. Hopefully, not too many of us.
I think
You guys don't?
I think first of all,
Yeah, but that's
I think I have at least half a dozen.
Yeah.
again, you can work experimentally through sensitivity analysis. You play around, you see, play
You
around.
see where I'm coming from, right?
So
Yeah.
you almost look
Yeah.
do a least square analysis to get closer
Yeah,
to you, and then you do what Henry does in his model, or what Marcus did.
Yeah. Because that project we've been talking about just
throw that
today,
stuff and see how
we're gonna have to
close you
do
are
this
to
today.
it. It's the fitting exactly, the fitting in that sense, you know. Which you can apply that kind of
Yeah, the
modeling.
gradient,
Exactly.
gradients and stuff. Yeah.
can we tell an agent that it's neurotic?
Yeah.
Sure.
Or whatever you want.
Sure.
Yeah.
Put it in any situation you want, and it's
And
real for them.
That's the beauty compared to experiments. It's internalized immediately.
Mm.
So it's not like you're giving a role and then you.
So we could take data collected manually, where we've identified types, stuff along the top, set up an agent for each individual type that responded manually, retrieve the data, and then collect and look for equivalents to see, calibrate that LM data against manually collected data.
That's what
That's exactly
Yeah.
this project.
Yeah. Because that's exactly what I want to do with that trust paper.
But yeah, it's like, it is just to be mindful that you need to be like, some situations you need to be very careful with what you're putting in. And Maria, that's for you. You've got to be very careful about what's on the right hand side, what goes in the agent context. You've done a lot of good work in defining what that agent context should be. So you've done great. Katie, there's a little bit more flexibility. We have a lot of data, but we still need to be somewhat smart about what we include. Is it the core demographics? Is it the extended? Is it the super extended? It's a bit of a different, like it's more about a trimming or a filtering problem than it is about what to put in, I guess, what to filter out, and that issue, or maybe it's not an issue, maybe it's a validation. Like I feed in the answers. Can you tell me what the answers were? Yeah. To your 10 questions, like, are they even reading the agent context? Yes, they are. Okay, cool. So we can proceed and take it away.
Of course, then what we come up with in that situation is the same problem we have with any survey collected data. Where we collect from the sun is representative of this, right? Because by setting persona, we are selecting in the distribution.
And and just like with humans, you don't really know the unobservables as well. You don't know exactly where they're being.
That's exactly right.
You need to think about when do you need a representative agent and when not. Depends on the question you're analyzing.
Yeah. Or should we just let the agent run riot?
Yeah.
So make its own decision and then compare it against subsamples which we collected either with LM or manually.
Yeah, so that'll be, you can try out these different modes, the roles. Like again, we talked a little bit about it last week or the week before, around like language model role, or play the role of a language model, and based on your training. Okay. Play the role of a person based on this context. Play the role of an assistant to a person of this context. Like so, you can play around with those too, depending on what you want, which way you want to go. Are you, with the person playing role, are we the subpopulation models? Like, are we representative of that subpopulation? That's that question. Assistance is more like that sort of principal agent problem. How well is the assistant to this type of person or this subpopulation? And then your language model is being more of an average or your general response that I would go if I got onto ChatGPT, and that's probably the one I'll get back.
Do you have a good idea of how we could, for example, start building a database? Like once we're able to calibrate, we start calibrating different personalities and that stuff.
And you database of types.
Exactly.
That's what we need.
And then in the end, what you have. Yeah, but what you have compared, for example, all these prolific and all these where they sell you, we get people for doing this and this. You more or less do the same thing that you have. People can say, I need this type of people for my survey or so. And then you say, look, we have them in a database, so you can actually play around with those different types.
Yep. Or do you have a fine-tuned model?
Or you can say, look, I want to understand
Different
now,
data
for example, now somebody, I want to understand, for example, work ethic, you know, and then I have a profile of an individual, you know, so calibration, and then I can start to say, look, I play with that person as the person would be in the real world. Imagine you are faced with this situation. Would you do it or not? Would you do it? You know, you can start really like understanding the person, solving real world problems.
And like this is stuff we've been doing like personas like for ages. But you can go rich. You can go super rich and deep with the context, which is like, and you can start to
use structural equation models to do that.
Yeah.
Right. So you end up with a path analysis model which is generated from manual data. You then identify the types in SurveyLM. You go and collect the same data for that type and compare those two models to calibrate. And then what you can do is you can then go out and do one of two things. For instance, if you're looking at trust, there's a number of items which you would have collected on, and when you use your structural equation modeling, you find that some of those are not relevant. So you can start asking questions like, why isn't item X1 significant in the covariance matrix when you collected it from that population versus that population? Do we have a population problem, or do we have an instrument problem, or do we have an agent problem? At the moment, we don't know. And we have issues of representativeness, we have issues of internal validity, and we have issues of external validity. But with this, we could test that 3x3.
It was a big.
And just use the competing path analysis models on the back end to iterate towards. Because we know what we should get on the back end if we're working with mature theory. We know what we should get. It's just so often when we collect from different populations or different sample sets, we find the covariance matrix looks completely different.
So is this response or this answer that I'm finding from this set of simulation, is it representative? Representative what?
Is it measurement error or is it instrument error?
Represent what are you what are
we ask the wrong person?
I think what we're able to get, for example, compared to an agent-based model who is rule-based. Once you have enough profiling, then you create a society. That is more flexible than the agent-based, rule-based. And then you can start testing interventions. What happens if you do this in this society?
And you can include the feedback.
Responding.
And we don't also have to just wait.
Which is also
and given sufficient computing and
giving
giving distributions of types and subtypes, then we could run the distributions of this distribution against that distribution against. So we could run an infinitesimal size of types against that model.
So the other thing is
we're
that
getting closer to be able to do that, right?
the other thing is that it depends on what you're looking at the output. So if we're taking just the data, the response. Okay, so like you've asked the question, exit voice loyalty. Okay, like you can get that. But I can also get the probability distribution behind like the different token sets. So I can ask. We ask SurveyLM currently. We just ask for one. The most likely tokens or whatever, depending on the temperature. But you can also return a set of tokens or and the probabilities associated with them. So maybe you return the top 5 sort of most likely responses to the question and the answer that you pose.
We can build an evolutionary model, right? An evolutionary model of types. And then see which ones survive.
So
you can look at survival.
There is
types.
I mean something that I think it's you will have a lot of stability when you move to macro levels. Because then you have some regularities. Like for example, if there's a conference, 20% of the people don't show up. You don't know the details why, but it's always more or less that kind of number. I think what we need to do in terms of once you create those types, we need also to play around and feed that stuff into panel data. And then see how individuals change over time.
Compare.
And then add this kind of information. Also changing part of the
The thing that worries me about things like panel data is it comes with so much measurement error. It's why data collected in laboratories, I think we've got to start with. So at least we have some sort of internal validity.
We need to understand how people also change. That's not what I'm saying.
Well, if you can look at
you can't just profile a person, then assume the person will not change. That's what I'm saying.
So
but we know now if we run panel data and include fixed effects and just look at change, the level of explanation just drops away massively already, right? Because of measurement error.
Yeah.
It's just survey data is noisy. It's full of noise. Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say with the world value survey, how it's over time. You can see there is that change more naturally, I guess, like where it is giving you like, accurate data of these countries, and it's representative. It's a national representative survey.
The cool thing with that
is that it's not.
Yeah, so not like a consistent set of people. So that's okay. Like if you had, it would be amazing if you had the same set of people across all 7 waves, across all the countries.
Sorry.
Amazing. But we've got we've got it might be another 3,000 people this year. But that speaks to Benno's earlier little point about the the macro stuff as well. Like you can check in that sense, have macro trends change over time across these waves? How well are we sort of representing them across these different waves? Okay, so I use the profile data from wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, wave 4, wave 5, wave 6, wave 7. Okay, the same set of characteristics. Maybe it's only 5 demographics, but we have that across all 7 waves, and then we're asking the same set of 10 questions, and we're saying, okay, is there, how are we changing over time, sort of thing.
But how would you fit in the change parameters? Like
Yeah, that was my question.
Vignettes.
How do you measure change?
You have to do it with
If you're
vignettes.
asking the
in the
same
lab, you
10
have to do it with
questions,
vignettes.
you get the response.
Yeah, but they're saying
From either computer
Yeah.
induced
Yeah.
or something.
No, I think you can model it easily with server lab, but I think what is relevant is how to calibrate.
Yeah. Calibration is
The calibration needs data.
Yeah. Existing
And
data that's
existing
reliable.
data that is reliable, and I think in terms of following the same people all the time, the only thing that we have more or less is, for example, the
Laboratory data is
the survey data, and the other data that we have is the field data. Like in Facebook, if you're able to track the same person over time, that's also possible. So if you're able to identify an individual in the field, you get also things through the linguistic analysis. You get a lot of insights from that tool, which then is not asking people for an opinion or something, but observing how they actually communicate.
Of course, we were talking before about the attrition of memory. If we calibrate against a survey like Hilda, where we know that memory bias is a major issue in the data, right? People can't remember when that exogenous shock occurred this year, whether it's 5 minutes ago or whether it was 365 days ago. And that makes a massive difference to the magnitude of the effect of whatever you're trying to measure, right? And it's the reason why we can't get at the heart of, the most blatant of variables. Things like well-being is really difficult to measure, which is why we were doing work on primary source HRV, which we can capture immediately. Right? So the issue of calibration is a real problem, right? If you think about the 1 kilo measure, right? The primary problem is first to find what a kilo is, right? So if you made a mistake in the beginning, you're going to end up with the perfect kilo plus or minus the error that you induced right at the start. And the only way that we do that now in the literature, particularly in the organizational behavior and psychology literature, is repeated studies, which means we have to grab as much laboratory data or survey data as possible and run this calibration method against it to try and refine down to the truth of the size of what a kilo should be. It's a classic problem. It's a problem in engineering, a massive problem in engineering, particularly electronics and electrical engineering. But it's an equal bigger problem in the IT industry, which is really just a manifestation of the those physical industries. Computer people just build abstract models of numbers which are supposed to look like reality. You're the guru. How do you handle calibration? So it's been a problem forever in the IT industry. The perfect model. We want the perfect model.
Well, there's never a perfect model.
That's correct. The problem, right?
I don't have anything for you. I gotta keep moving in this slide. So
Moving on. Sorry.
I'm just. It's an open question. Let's leave it open. How do you calibrate? And you know, it speaks to that again. That open question around representativeness, or like, you know, like the how deep do you have to go in context? What's the context of detail? How much detail do you need to go into? So context of detail. Now, so yeah, we've mentioned that we have those two approaches. Again, like Anna Maria's has this sort of like, we don't have the existing data somewhere, so she's done some work and she's defined the left-hand side and the right-hand side, and also the right-hand side. And then we talked about another option, which is the loading using real-world or existing data sets, like the World Value Survey, for example, to calibrate the prompt for the agent profile. So yeah, cool. Two approaches there, which is nice. And we just call that built-in sort of or direct upload, feature. If you use the existing data, you can use build like if you want to just create, you know, the more standard profiles, or sort of, you know, synthetically generate new agent profiles based on context that you care about, different independent variables you want to include in the agent context. You can use SurveyLM directly. There's an option for synthetic profile creation, but just noting that they're using independent probability distribution draws. So, like, I might end up with a 10-year-old with a PhD or something like that, if I'm not controlling for joint sort of probabilities or cross probabilities. So if you want to get more complex with that, I have got some Python sort of tools I've been working on for a while, to look at those sort of more complex. At the moment, just sort of like between two variables, but you know, we can sort of scale it up eventually. To generate sort of data sets that you can then direct upload based on the stuff that you created. So now, like, again, what do we include? What's the model of the intelligent decision maker? I talked a little bit about agent-based modeling, like ABMs or agentic sort of design in the last session very briefly. I also told you to just look at those slides, and if you want anything else on that, I do also have another sort of whole module from a unit that I did with Ben at B350, so on agent-based models. So if you want to look more into that, feel free. We won't do it today, but this model is kind of nice, neat. Got a nice little cute little picture too, that sort of links back to the general sort of AI model or approach. You got some observation of the environment, some reward sort of feedback based on how you do, taking the action. So take the action based on the observation, and based on the outcome, you get some reward or not. This shows the internal or a proposed model by Sutton, one of the leaders of sort of forefathers of the reinforcement learning sort of stream of the AI literature, telling us about the internals. So we got, it's like a perception unit or module, some sort of like you know, value function. How do we actually fit, you know, decisions moving me towards what I wanted. Sort of mapping rewards, punishments to different states, I guess. Telling us whether or not we're on the right path in that sense. Reactive policies is sort of like taking the output from that sort of learning process plus the actual model that the agent builds itself in the transition model. So modeling itself, modeling the world, that sort of thing, how it plans and understands the world's dynamics. The reactive policy is sort of like taking between those two, sort of contrasting sort of blocks, I guess. One's a bit more foresight, one's looking back in the past. And you know, at the end of the day, we got to choose one sort of primary policy or so on, one action, right? Or set of actions. So that one has to make the hard call there. State is shared across all of this, right? There's feedbacks, you know, like what I perceive might feed back into what I, you know, perceive next time or whatever. My first impression might then feed back into my second sort of slower thinking, more deliberative thinking, right? So maybe there's a bit of system 1, system 2 stuff there. Interesting model just to think about.
Did you have some chats recently with Son, for example, about the value functions? Because we talked about it a little bit. I mean, again, reward and punishment is a very behavioralistic one, very powerful to understand a bit where you are in that sense. But if you want to program it in more sophisticated value function, how do we proceed? I mean, do you have any thoughts since the last time we talked about it? What one can do in terms of programming, move a little bit beyond this reinforcement learning?
I mean, you can take
really
like
play around with the value functions a bit much better.
Like just in like conceptually, I'll say that it's like, you know, I'd be bringing in a lot of it's sort of generally just based on your own action and the outcomes just for you, right? But like you can also, you're thinking about the multi-agent sort of systems. You can think about like the outcomes for others as part of your sort of value function and that sort of feedback in that sense. Maybe that gives you some of the some of those sort of you know, altruism or things like that. We can start to, you know, incorporate that rather than specifically specifying that you have to improve the welfare of others as your reward or punishment. I can just say, okay, I just give you the feedback and sort of, you know, I suppose you got to combine with your own outcomes, actions, outcomes, learning from that with this overall state. Maybe there's a sort of a weighting between the two to say care about others, care about self, sort of thing. That's
still the utility function based approach, or not?
Yeah.
We're just retrofitting what you put in.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, it's different ways
Yeah.
too. It's different. So like you talk about different state representations, right? Like I can take that's like, to me, that's like the state representation is like I'm seeing it through this state or this set of values, like things like that. So
yeah, no, I mean, again, reward punishment. Okay, I see you do something good, then I'm rewarding you. You do something bad, I'm punishing you. That's a very behavioralistic. If you look at, you know, how psychology evolved.
Yeah.
But if you think about cognitive revolution of psychology, they would say, maybe in the value function, you give them guiding principles. You know, instead of behavioral responses, by saying, I introduce a Kantian ethic.
Yeah.
And then you explore what do they do with this value function. And then they will restrict their possibility set, or they will automatically do something without you needing to constantly put a carrot and the stick next to it.
Yeah.
And then the question is, how does it then such a system learn? If you introduce, and how precise you need to be in terms of the feedback, or is it, or guiding principles and concepts also already quite valuable? I just missed that part, the guiding. That's how we also, in terms of creativity, that's how we search the possibility set also.
Isn't that not like again, that's like, you know, that's the guiding principle we've defined one of the value functions, or like how that influences or interacts with the state space, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because if
it's part of the value function.
Yeah, everything's going to be coming back to numbers. Like with these models, everything comes back to vectors. And we've got to be able to, you know, I guess part of that problem is also like how to actually translate some of these things into value functions. Like, if I'm no longer looking just at your actions and your outcomes, if it's adherence to some principle, what does that mean?
Exactly what that means.
So that actually then puts a lot of work into how you specify the thing. It's like it's more like it opens up a big can of worms on how do you actually what's the actual instant, like how do you actually implement this and how do you assess right and wrong or whatever, adherence or not?
The problem we have in social
alignment
science, in social science, is we're not trained to understand the implication of your value function properly, and then link it to learning. How am I learning if I have a quantum principle compared to utilitarian?
Yeah, I think there's another dimension there too, which strikes at the heart of the difference between
the learning part is missing.
The behavioural school and the thinking school of well-being. So you've been talking in deontological terms, which is very behavioural, right? Now, guys like Martin Seligman and me would like to remind everybody that we're thinking apes, right? And there's a big literature that, particularly in the positive psychology area, that in fact, if you don't punish people, but you encourage people, you get a better outcome than if you use carrot and stick.
Yeah.
And this is still a raging argument in the area of psychology, right? Seligman won't speak to people at Harvard because he reckons they're a bunch of behavioural freaks, right? And he used to be the president of the APA. And it's still raging today, 40 years later. And I think that with IT people getting into this, they're going to get into the same, basically we're making a decision to automate the behavioural-based thinking versus the thinking ape-based thinking with the positive psychology of things, right? Which is right, very much driven by incentives, not behaviour, right? What comes before the behaviour is what Martin Seligman would say. It's what comes before the behaviour and how the thinking influences. The behaviour is an outcome. It's not an input to the system. It's an outcome.
Yeah. No, it's not clear because you need to always link it to learning.
Well, there's a feedback on that too. Exactly. Exactly.
But what I'm saying is, for example, like Seligman and those, they don't make the leap to the learning part.
No, so I agree.
You can say encouragement,
the hippie black box.
But then you need to think about, okay, what does encouragement mean in terms of learning? Are you learning better? How do you deal with feedback in terms of encouragement?
That's probably more to do with how they've been doing their experiments.
This is a problem, for example, you observe. The US is a good example. I think Australia is also a good example. That you can say you never tell, for example, a kid, you did a bad job. Shit work that you've done. You say, yeah, you're good. You're very good. Well done. This is positive encouragement.
Give them a star.
Yeah, give me a star.
Yeah, and then we're getting the star escalation where stars no longer have an effect.
What's the feedback of that one?
Exactly. It's assumed away by the kid. And he wants a bigger star. And then we end up.
Are you sure that you want to proceed on that path? In that sense?
It's the path to a little monster.
Imagine your child says, "I want to become a professional dancer."
Yeah.
And she's been having ballet and everything, but you, as observing her, you realize that she's not a good ballet dancer. She enjoys dancing, and you encourage her, but she now wants to be a professional dancer. How do you do that? Do you encourage her to become a professional dancer, or do you tell her, "No"?
I would try break dancing
without a kangaroo.
Or football players. I mean, there's
a
discussion.
It's a real issue.
5% of football players, female or males, they don't make it. And they're doing this in elite classes. How do you give them feedback? Yeah, 5% of elite stream. Like Bundesliga
end up making it.
They end up making it in the top.
Instead of the other way around.
End up making it. So 95 who have this idea of a professional career in football won't make it. These are already very talented people.
Yeah.
Or you tell your son of maybe would be good if you invest more in your education, because I don't think you will make it as a professional. So when do you provide feedback? When do you how do you keep intrinsic values that still provide feedback when you need to provide? I mean, this is a huge challenge.
It's yeah, and I think that's why it's still a raging debate, right? In schools, the escalating star problem is a real issue.
But we haven't even figured out in schools and education like the right or the common like what is the? I mean, all the pedagogies are like to tear them to the kid or the class, the content. Like it's a really difficult. If you're trying to translate like the ideas behind feedback or it's like how do you assess and get them to improve from pedagogies, how do you translate that into rewards? We don't even know how to like do it for humans yet. So it's like super, it's a super difficult problem. There is also some stuff around like, do we, rather than specifying shit, do we just, or figuring out exactly like, are you adhering to this principle? Like maybe there are different sort of like, off the top of my head, I can't remember what they're called, but there are like sort of different algorithms, models, whether or not they're AI based or not, that you can actually start to get like the essence, I'll call it, like of some social sort of situation. Like very it's hard to understand completely particularly if they're AI based models. Like what are we actually drawing out here? But we have models that help us. We've had them for so long that help us cut out shit, even if we don't really understand what the shit is that we've ended up with.
How good are we, for example, again, this kind of when to punish and when to reward? When can you identify that this is a bad situation and you need to punish, or this is a good situation? Like, for example, think about the Fisher chess situation where Fisher sacrificed the queen to get more position in the game. This would be a goal, for example, would say this is bad. Don't sacrifice your queen in that sense. If you're not smart enough to understand Fisher,
timescales? Timescales.
Yeah, no, it's just time scale. It's just about you need to be smart enough to understand. In this particular time, it was a good idea to sacrifice it, and that means about is it short-term goals that you're looking? Is it long-term goals?
So, like you might have multiple reward or value functions.
And what's the type of the individual on the other side of the board? And the type of individual on the other side of the board. One thing that humans are quite good at is judging types and tweaking their behavior so that they manipulate the type on the other side to get their outcome, right? We're pretty good at manipulating one another. Right? So it's real time as well, right? It's not just time.
So you have a problem with how the value function is specified in a sense, not more the idea of the punishment.
Well, I think it's very narrow. It's very powerful to solve a lot of problems, but also very narrow in that sense.
The reward and punishment part.
Yeah, it's extremely powerful for.
Well, can we just say like that's plus minus? Let's go multiply and divide.
Criticizing is the same that you don't sometimes know what is plus and minus, and you said okay. Maybe the key element is temporal part. I would say I agree, but sometimes our contextual parts that we have not realized and require certain intelligence to understand. Is that really a plus? Or is it really a minus?
And the weight that individual places on the new piece of information that comes in front of them, right?
I think an AI, because it has all the information, short-term memory should actually
question is question is how do they deal with it? That's a good question. Are they able to be smart enough to understand and classify properly because they have so much knowledge, or do you need to feed additionally? Pay attention to that point.
Maybe
if you say that the system is smart enough,
the value functions from the other side of this, by the way. Sort of if you have a profile of somebody and you know what their actions are in certain situations, can you then derive the value function based on what they do in certain situations?
Yeah, that's the society of types model.
That's what we're trying to do.
That's the society. That's the one to infinity of of types of agents, right? Build every possible agent and then throw all the agents in there and see what happens. But in reality, we don't all come into contact with everybody on the planet at the same time, which means that we all learn differently.
Super hard problem. Anyone who's looking for a PhD or a master's, great topic.
I think there's a Nobel Prize in that one.
Yeah. So anyone who wants a Nobel Prize.
Only if
Economists are not smart enough to do that one, mate. Nah. Economists, the economists at the London School of Economics are having a discussion about AI. Do you know what they're discussing?
IP.
You ready for this? No. How AI is going to take our jobs.
Huh.
Can you believe that? Jesus. This is scientists
Hope so.
putting on blinkers.
It's great for us.
This is London's #1 economics school in Europe, and this is the conversation that the Royal Economic Society is having with them. How is AI stealing your job? I remember this when we first started putting computers into businesses. Computers were going to take away everybody's job. I'm sure they had the same conversation at the Farriers Guild the first time a car rolled down the road.
I think this is what we worry about.
Yeah, that's another one. That's another one. Yeah.
Hallelujah. If only they could.
That's another one, exactly. That's another one.
If we're worried about how they'll control us if we're not forced into the grind every day. Like, they've got nothing else. How do you control human beings if we're not chained to a mortgage and chained to a job? They have they've got no answers. How do they manage society because they're still a domination and control?
One thing we do know is that
that will get
flexibility.
worse. I mean, that discussion will get worse because now people think, okay, now we have more instruments to control. We can centralize things.
But I have more instruments that I can like make your actions more transparent too.
Yes.
But who's better at
But
tools?
then decentralizing and centralizing information.
Did you require massive centralization just because of the computer servers required to run this?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, governments can spend that money. That's not a problem.
Yep.
But they will. I mean, all this critique, for example, on Hayek or so, you can't centralize it because there's not enough information available. So you need to think a lot about local knowledge, and sometimes local knowledge is enough. And that stuff. Now,
You just got to have a look at the
governments
physical and political environments that
now we can
operate now.
centralize more. You know,
We know that central planning doesn't work, and that the canton does.
No, but this will pop up again. They will say it didn't work in the past, but now we have our we have a better knowledge.
They will try it.
Exactly,
It won't work. So
The problem is,
they will try.
in computing, the problem is as the database builds, it doesn't build in a linear manner. It goes like this, right? So the problem becomes worse than an exponential. It becomes horrendously big. I just mentioned it before. Just a 5x4 by 2x9 by just to look at trust and personality of an individual builds a covariance matrix so big that it's just off the scale.
It's not like you just have the AI system as your advisor. That's what. But then but this because you have the AI as advisor, you justify that we need to centralize.
What's truly amazing is that humans have survived in this level of complexity for so long without going mad.
Sure.
And it's like incredible.
Surely not get mad.
We won't get
Well, mad is a relative thing. Remember, Benno, mad is a relative thing. If you're the only sane person in the room, you're the mad one.
But it's like it's very it's the point that Moya brings up.
Exactly.
There's a big opportunity here or it'll be a big perceived opportunity to go for that central planning again and cut costs comes from the top execs. It comes from maybe the countries that are concerned with the productivity metrics. The other metrics that we're using to define productivity fit for this economy. I don't know. Maybe
any data available all data, for example, that economists use is always political.
Of course it is. It's political in the way they decide to collect it before they even get any data.
I mean, I think
they make assumptions and then collect the stuff they think they need based on the outcome that's going to, based on, it's all biased. We know that.
Consumer price index is biased.
So this is always my question. Why does the AI industry keep saying that the data from their AI deployment is concrete? It's not. It's a
dynamic.
Process.
It's comprehensive.
But it's like.
Or is it? I don't know.
I like your idea.
Cultural process.
Yeah. Yep.
I reckon the starting point is we've got to start with a society of AI types, and we keep building the size of that, and then ultimately your avatar comes with an AI type so that you can run the possibilities of your decision, of your questions and decisions through your avatar to basically have a look at what would happen, so to do what ifing. At the moment, we do what if and we wait for the truck to hit us, right?
Yeah, but I don't know the avatar. I mean, the avatar, you just hang around the avatar that you have around you. So you create a bubble in itself.
So we're going to engage in reality or delusion. True.
Creation of a bubble is usually biased. For example, how you look at the world, and how you
see there are
useful. Yeah, it's useful for you. Well, but it also can be discriminatory. Can be because there are a lot of factors that it can be what for example, if you think about like dictatorships, they surround themselves by people who they like, and sooner or later there will be a revolution, and because they didn't acquire enough intelligence to keep. That's usually.
Yeah, for years we've had decision support systems in computing that basically enshrine the thinking of the organisation. Right? We've had that around for a very, very long time. Those things work fine until you get exogenous shocks, right? Which the model doesn't know about. And one thing you can almost guarantee with a decision support system is it's going to get you in the ballpark, but it won't actually get you to home base.
But yeah, it's
stuff
just
changes.
a support.
Yeah.
But what are the consequences of if you think about process? What would you then? What does it mean then?
Well, that's big. Where do I even start?
In the sense of like process of choosing what data, or like what do you mean? No, I'm just trying to clarify your question.
How will you structure the problem?
Well, firstly,
the main point.
I acknowledge that any time I interact with the data, that it's a political cultured process.
Yep.
And I wouldn't ever dare say that this is
Objective.
objective concrete data. I would be so silly.
Yep.
Or self-absorbed to state that.
So awareness is the first.
And I guess it's about trying to appear to be scientific and trying therefore to lean into logos and science processes. Rather than going the other way and saying that this is a humanist endeavor. So, I don't know if this story is relevant, but I remember in primary school that our school got a computer. And so that was my first ever experience of computer. They put it in the middle of the room and brought all these classes around to look at it, saying this is going to revolutionize the world. And we walked around it, and I looked at the cord, and it wasn't even plugged in. These people didn't even know that it had to be plugged into the wall. And so it's always been a relationship with technology, that it's a cultural process. It's not about it at all. It's about how we change in relation to it.
Yeah.
So
there's a movie about that. Did it have 42 written on the screen?
So, these people who have grade 9 education that were running the school, some of them maybe grade 10, have got to figure out how to use this technology. And the technology adapts, and so do we with it.
Yeah.
But we're still facing kind of the same questions.
Age-old.
Which is why I talk about co-evolution with this technology.
Yeah.
We have to come at it from a humanist perspective.
Why Popper focused on that more?
What you said before is relevant too.
On the what?
On the interaction with technology. His research that when he moved away from Minsky and we focus, for example, how children learn through using computers.
Yeah. Well, that's what you mentioned before. Forcing.
That's what I was trying to
forcing
think
those
of
changes.
before.
Can we say go? Yeah,
Having worked for 30
I was thinking
years in the IT
Peugeot.
industry, the
No, no,
only
no.
thing that's certain is change. So you end up over a period of time.
Oh,
For
Peugeot.
example,
I was thinking
learning
Peugeot.
language A, B, C, D,
That's
E,
right.
C. You know, I think I'm up to about my 9th or my 10th. Right?
Sorry. All right, let's get
What's
cracking.
going to happen when we force that on everybody? Because this is going to force it on everybody.
With number 5.
Yeah, number
6,
5.
7.
Let's try not get to number 5.
Not everybody can do that.
I think it's already lost.
Yeah, I know.
Change the verse.
There are 100 slides.
Yeah. All right. So we've still got heaps. Let's keep going. So now we've talked a bunch about how to calibrate. So we've pretty much just covered that slide on what is how do you create the agents and a couple you have those 2 different routes. Am I defining them myself, like what goes on the right and left hand side, like Anna Maria, or am I uploading some existing data like Katie? So there's that, and then the other side of the equation, okay, is well, what are we actually getting them to respond to? I just like a dumb name at the moment, structured game tables, just because it's a structured table game, because why not? Call it what you want. I don't know. The key part is the key structure, right? There's 3 columns, and they need to be named exactly as this. And these ones are wrong because they got capitalization. Okay, so it's actually everything is lowercase. Question ID, answer instruction. Okay, please pay attention to lowercase. And I did the bad thing here. But again, you've got question ID, answer instruction. That's all you need. That can help you set up surveys, question answer, or block of questions, block of answers, all in one cell. Or it also sets up experiments. Okay, so stimulus and response options. Psychological studies in that sense, it's very flexible in that sense to whatever you want to really do, fitting within question and answer instruction. You can think about 1 row as 1 block of questions, or if you want to include a few different rows at the same time with batch mode on, maybe it's a game sort of situation, like multiple stages, and traverse your way down through the questions as you go. But again, key 3 columns, question ID and answer instruction. They are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to get too much into it. I'm just going to run through, because we did touch on these just a very little bit, I'm going to go very quick through these, but just showing some examples for you guys to get some intuition before I want to jump into an actual sort of hands-on, let's work on something together. So some more basic ones, like 1 question, 1 answer, survey, basic stuff, nice and easy, one row per question. You could also think about, are we using, what sort of scales are we using? Is it select 1, select multiple options, like it, open text, whatever you want, binary questions, yes, no's, whatever. You might then start moving into slightly less basic. So maybe there's this sort of element of choose all applicable, right? Sort of open text responses. Choose 1 option and explain your reasoning or thought process to get there. You're starting to sort of get towards those sort of more complex VigNet sort of hypothetical sort of scenarios.
Steve,
hopefully getting closer to the real world.
Steve, with your vignette there, you're talking about text. Often when we're giving people information in the vignette, we may use a picture or a table. Do we need to translate that into text?
At the moment, we do. With this version
How do we do that?
SurveyLM, it's difficult. At the moment, there is a product, in the product roadmap for SurveyLM, is to incorporate multimodal sort of interaction. So that's when you start to be able to put in directly images or sort of maybe it's a whole data set, analyze this or something like that, or a video or things like that. At the moment, yes, text-based. So in one of our recent studies, we came across a vignette that actually used a visual stimulus as part of their experiment. What I did there was literally just give me one sentence description of what's in the text, and I used that in place. So I had scenario text, scenario image. So it didn't capture it completely, but it sort of, some of the core relationships were shown, but then more of the nuanced sort of stuff where you're looking at like the descriptive text might not indicate it's more human or less human. It's a bit fuzzy or furry. That's when it started to struggle. But then I could have just done a shitty
complex
description
area
of a visual.
Scale validation here, right? Which is the foundation for calibration. It's the what. And if you think about, say, a table which shows a rank of 5 people with a number against it, there's very many different ways to describe that with words. Right? So we're into the word, into the area of
you might have to try a couple
the
of
author
variations.
versus the writer. Okay, which is a very, those people are very different. I can see some research opportunities on scale validation here.
Oh, heaps, yeah. But yeah, very good point. Like core, limitation at the moment is that we have this. We are running with text only inputs at the moment. But it will change. Yep. So it's not to say, like we're currently doing a project with or sort of a bit of a prelim sort of project with industry partner through BETA with Trish and their idea is looking at comparing actually like videos, analyzing videos for sort of the question and answer there is here's the video. Okay, the question and the answer instruction is give me a second by second play or storybook of what's going on in this ad. Are they doing any like behavioral sort of or social sort of nudges or things like that? We're using those sort of devices and classifying in that sense. So that's not that hard to do with the assistance API model, but just haven't incorporated into SurveyLM just at this point. So it's but it's gone there.
The added complexity there is the question about human perception compared to AI perception. So what they're seeing. That links to again, attention, valence, and all that, interpretation in that sense. But
so are they just using like object detection and then feed that into something else? And if you think about the multimodal models, they might be here's the image or the text or the video. I run it through a sort of my more object detection or sort of scene classification sort of steps first, then I feed the output of that into the summarizer or whatever you want to call it, the reasoner, which then generates a response based on the answers that are extracted in the first step. So, is that how humans do it? I don't know.
So it means that we need to, as soon as it becomes more visual, we need to go back into this intellectual perception.
Psychometric. You need to go back into the psychometric literature as well. You need to go back into
attention. Yeah, let's go back to attention.
Just before you put up you used the word look at. Are you using different, 5, 7?
You can use whatever you want.
Whatever you want.
So you can define whether it's a 5.
Yep.
What about things like ladder scales? Are you using those as all? 0 10s.
Whatever you want.
Literally whatever you want.
You can literally do that.
Question and answer instruction.
And does it assume linearity on those? Like one of the things the ladder scale does is assumes linearity, whereas Likert doesn't normally do that. It actually forces to the mean.
I mean, I don't ask when I ask the question a person from 1 to 7 or 1 to 10. They probably not like assume a linear. I don't have to say assume a linearity or that, and they're probably not.
But humans react very, very differently to a Likert scale versus a ladder scale, right?
Yeah.
We know from psychometric analysis that when you give a 0 to 7 or 0 to 5, first thing they look for is the middle value, right?
Yes.
They don't do that on ladder scales. Right? It's harder to do. Right? but then you get bias, like in the Hilda. What they do is they actually give a linear going upwards thing, right? Which introduces bias into the selection medium. The wrong thing to do. This is a really complex area.
Yeah, good to tell you.
The answer
It could be this shape function.
Yeah.
But yes, very in that sense, like again, it's question and it's answer instruction, very flexible. So like, you know, those last ones a little bit more easy, yeah, or a little bit less easy or less basic. You know, your heart desires, right? Moderately complex, so projective, or you know, again, really just putting them into more and more sort of complex context or scenarios and things like that. You know, maybe get a moderately detailed sort of vignette and tell me how you would respond to the questions in the order that you pose to them. Yeah, that's cool. It's like a question block. You know, maybe you start moving into like groups and basic sort of group study. So rather than providing one agent, okay, one agent with multiple sort of columns of context, you know, characteristics, age, gender, they're all separate columns for that one row, which is an agent. Maybe we recast the row of agent to row of agents, and the column, which was a characteristic, becomes a whole profile for an individual agent within that set of agents. So then, you know, if you're providing that sort of, you know, profiles of the agents within the group, and then we can start to think about, you know, jury, you know, what would you vote? Give me a vote for each group member, and what was the final decision that you guys came to, and what's the rationale? Or maybe it's like, okay, participate in this sort of like prison guard, or, you know, half of you are prison guards, half of you are prisoners. What does that remind you of? And you're asking, you know, provide this observational log of behaviours, interactions, and rule enforcement. Yeah, do what you want, basically, and get creative with it.
Can you reverse code your answer instruction?
Can you what?
Can you reverse code it?
Sure.
Like as in, sorry, come again, reverse code.
You can do it one of two ways. What you can do is you can ask a positive question and flip the
Oh,
numbers,
yeah.
or you can leave the numbers as they are and ask
and
ask a negative question.
Yeah, absolutely.
You randomise
that is
the questions that you present the agent with.
Oh, that's a good one. So with that one, it is more of a case of what you put in, what you load in. So you'll be needing to do the front end randomization of questions to then define what questions you load in. There's a program of work still to come with this that turns this into an API, so I don't have to ever touch that platform.
Why do you want to randomize it? Why do you want to randomize?
Remove systemic bias.
Yeah, but you can.
But you can include independent responses. So there's two options.
Responses.
We talked a little bit about batch mode.
Exactly.
Batch mode is like, you know, if you got batch mode off, it treats all of these questions here, and it's going to go one by one, and it's an independent sort of, you know, it triggers like a fresh person.
No path dependency.
You know, there's no memory. It's a separate call.
Okay.
If I batch them together,
that's what I was getting at.
Yeah,
exactly.
Question memory.
Yeah, if I batch them together, then yeah, I got to look out, and I got to think about maybe doing front end loading of the randomization if you want to control for that. But anyway, there's
what
that other option.
What happens if I do want memory?
Yeah, that's batch mode on.
Yeah.
So batch mode on.
Batch mode on, and that'll remember what happened.
That's nice. So they just overcome one of the biggest issues in manual surveys.
Correct.
Systemic bias is a real problem.
Yeah. The one thing to note though with the batch mode is that the batching is based on the context of the available model. So we are trying to fit within the context window of the specific model that you chose. If I, in my model parameters for that simulation set up GPT.4, it was back in the day 16K model, okay, 16K context. I've got to fit within that 16K context. Okay, so if I've got like 20 questions and they're really long, maybe that is outside the context window, okay, of the 16K. So I might do a batch mode in that sense, and there might be 2 calls. Okay, 2 separate API calls with no memory from the first call, but the second call, you know, within the 2 calls, you got memory, but between the calls, you don't. So that's just something to keep in mind of if you're doing batch mode and you want all the questions to be included every time, just be mindful about the context windows, okay? So if you're using a bigger model, 1 to 8K context, like the current GPT Turbo 3.5, or you can call it 4.0, I think they're at 128K context. Most of the standard models now, maybe 256. You might not have as big of a problem as you did with the 16K model or the 4K or the 8K models. Okay, that's less of an issue now. We've got bigger context windows, but keep it in mind. Yes?
Oh, is that like with the max retry attempts?
Max, it's a little bit different.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's good to ask this because the match. So when you're making API calls, where there's and the way they're sort of, I guess they're managing like rate limiting and things like that on their side. We've also got to try and match or sort of make sure we're not like overloading the system in that sense. So sometimes I might make a request and their server, for whatever reason, might just reject it. Okay, so I'll retry. This becomes a real big issue also with like unexpected responses. Okay, so if I turn the temperature all the way up to 1.5, it's real wacky, real random. They don't like to respond in JSON or in what's the other one called, XML anymore. So if they don't want to respond in the format, we can't extract the data. So in that case, we'll just say, nah, non-compliance. We'll try again. We will try it again. We'll record the non-compliance. Okay, you stuffed up. You misunderstood. You crossed on the complete wrong part of the circle, sort of thing. We'll retry it again. And if you've set max retries to 5, that's how many times it's going to retry. Okay, on the 5th time, gets a failure, then okay, that's it. You're recorded as 5 failures. You suck. Move on. So
did it charge on the fail attempt?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, they do. So unless if it's a knocked back straight away, if their side cancels me, no, it's all good. So it didn't even get to them, right? If they cut it off before it gets to them, then it's all good.
So
They're overloaded. But if it does, it's a failure, just be mindful. Okay, that's something to keep in account. We do give windows with our estimates for our simulations. The upper window, I've never seen it be, even when I've turned up temperature and I've turned up the retries. Okay, like I've never seen it go over, but that's not to say that it won't happen ever. I will never give you that guarantee. So just be mindful if it is temperature's really high and the questions are really long, complex, or things like that. Like they're not, it's not clear how to respond. Then the models will struggle, and maybe that tells you that the questions and the answer instructions you put in suck, or maybe it tells you to reduce the complexity of the context you're sending in, or play around with the temperature settings to go for something a little bit less creative or wacky. So we talked about like here, got these. You can think about like incorporating some group stuff, right? And going from like the basic ones. This is just a hangover slide from some stuff with TMR about mapping the journey. Okay, so let's think about maybe a more corporate or industry use of a similar platform, and you might be looking to optimize your service provision across TMR, very diverse sort of range of services they provide. So they're trying to optimize this really complex system. It's really useful for them in that sense to be able to map out like life stages or touch points across this whole journey. That sort of design process, like personas and customer journey mapping, like traditionally very like design heavy, like human heavy, like a lot of experts of input, right? But here we can actually like test it out, okay? And I can make all these like little micro variations or counterfactuals in the way I deliver the service. I smile, I add a smile, or I flip you off afterwards, or something like that to trial out. Okay, under that context, and this service provision, this might be some of the outcomes. Allows you to explore in that sense a bit more free in a controlled environment and scale up this sort of customization. That's why I kept this one in here. That's all. Now we talked about like group games. Yes. Okay. We talked about surveys. We talked about all those other instruments. I suppose now let's get into this like experiments. So explain your rules and literally just give you answer instruction just like you would. So if you think about designing like an experiment, maybe with Qualtrics or like SmartRex or like Oaktree or something like that, you can think about the different pages that someone goes on during the experiment, and I need the rules, yes, and I need to then have some answer on indicating how many units you choose to give or not. So again, just showing you it's quite flexible in that sense. Maybe you want to consider like feedback from a previous stage. Sometimes you can include, the multiple questions and answer instructions, batch mode on, okay, and I can look at feedback that way, or I can just artificially insert feedback. Okay, so RPG middle, you're in round 5, previous levels, rounds, you've had varying cooperation, or maybe they've been very uncooperative. Considering the outcomes from the previous stages, decide on your contribution in this stage. So you're like inserting them rather than waiting for them to see if they get to that state and then uncooperative or cooperative. We can actually just put them in that situation and see how they respond from there, which is cool. So a bit more sort of rather than waiting for things to come around, we can just make them happen and go from there. Again, different levels of sort of feedback. Player A transferred you 30, 50, 80. Do you accept or not?
I think an interesting thing would be to see whether these artificial agents are doing, for example, what game theory would love that humans are doing, but the humans are not doing, like backward induction, for example. Which is
the biggest issue in those games.
Which is at the core of
cool
game theory.
Yeah.
Humans don't do backward induction.
Yeah.
So
so you can ask like a prompt if you have to tell me your backwards deduction versus one that is left to be free to decide how to choose on its own accord. Yeah.
Cool. That would be really cool to see.
Very cool. Very low hanging fruit.
Very low hanging.
Has anybody written a paper on using this to test the learning effect?
There won't be. People will not be as fast at doing that compared to just redo the traditional experiments.
I mean, like the girl from
the backward induction much more interesting.
Like the girl from RNIT, she wants to do something, classical game with AI, anyways, right?
But
not in this style.
But that's just still
Because I remember discussing this with David Johnston, and he ultimately did it, where you try and pick up the 16 or 32 iterations of this sort of game, you turn it into a panel and run fixed effect model on it, right? But with your ability to turn batch mode on and off, right, you're effectively removing learning effect.
Yeah, I mean you can trial it though, and then just.
I think there's a great paper there.
Yeah, like rather than you might be able to just say.
Ways.
Yeah.
If we've already got data from a trust game or something, right?
Yeah.
Then we can have a look at the manual data. We can run David's panel model, which is really easy with fixed effects. So, and then we can run it with and without batch mode on, compare those the resulting outcome models. That would be an interesting paper, right? Because I don't think the fixed effects is going to get rid of it. I don't think it's fixed. I think it's dynamic.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not a function of personality or type.
Yeah,
it's a function of new information. It's an interaction between who you are and the information.
Yeah, that's what we should do.
I think that's because the biggest criticism, I remember when I first came, when I sat down with Rudy Kirschmeyer, and he started with Rudy, and he started teaching me about these games. The biggest issue I saw was learning effect. I think corrupts the results of these things.
Zelton has some nice scenarios where he shows, for example, that people instinctively, for example, don't do backward induction. You can actually run those self-centered scenarios and then see what artificial agents are.
Yeah.
And that's cool because it's getting us more into that, like what's coming before, you know. So like we've been talking a lot, and a lot of these examples are like, again, and we've alluded to it multiple times with the discussions, like this behavioralistic approach, that you know, maybe there's not so much work being done on that sort of like what comes before the outcome, right? And you think back to that model that Sutton had, and you know, the arrow coming out of it is the action, and we've been looking at that for a long time, the action, the output. But this idea here, you know, you can force them to think in certain ways. You use backwards inductions, or you're a you know, you can calibrate them to act in the way you want, in that sense, to explore the variables of interest that you want, and to put that in yourself, rather than having to wait for it to happen. Or
I was focusing too much on the value function, but you're right. We need to also focus on the perception.
Value function feeds back into perception, yeah.
Yeah, it does, but also separately in that sense. So, in a sense, for example,
like it frames your view of.
Yeah, but again, these things like about rationality, attention, all that stuff plays a role in terms of how you perceive things.
Yeah. The other issue I saw with these sorts of games is more often than not we give people outcomes which require them to be able to compare this and that. Those people who are good at running maths in their head, right? Some just can't. That's not an issue. But we know that, particularly in Australia at the moment, about 70% of the children around here are incapable of handling probabilities in proportions, right? So they will all.
Do they rely on just feeding?
They rely on one-shot games and guesses, right? They guess.
That's because you teach them, maybe.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is the types that we're getting now will have a lower ability to respond to these games, whether they're manual or not. Whereas I think your agents probably won't have that trouble, will they? Or are they going to reflect this new mathematically dumb society that we're building?
Well, that's actually worth checking.
It is, isn't it?
What sort of math
it is, isn't it?
using in solving?
Exactly. You know,
like backward integration is one of those heuristics, but they all have heuristics.
There was another article. I remember back in 2011, I read an article from NBER that said that 70% of economics undergraduates in their second year at a US university know the difference between nominal and real. This week I read an article where the banking system had been, and I think again it was the US, was testing the ability of their clients to understand the decision they made with respect to a housing loan. And most people couldn't understand. About 70%, once again, around 70% of the people had no ability at all to even understand what they were signing when they signed up for a mortgage.
And didn't know compound interest.
Well, yes.
Exactly.
Or simple interest. In most cases, it's just simple interest, right? You know, if I borrow $1,000 at 10%, how much interest am I going to pay? And if I do that over 5 years, you know, they just can't understand it. Right?
It depends what the assistant
and these games
fine-tuning has, like what sort of fine-tuning, assistant fine-tuning has your model that you're looking at or working on, at what has it on?
I think there's a great
OpenAI has been very, very conscious that they need to perform well on maths, on mathematical benchmarks. So they feed in the data sets for those benchmarks to fine tune how you know, and work. And that's why let's think step by step, the chain of thought reasoning. That's why, you know, think about where do you have that that little bit of text. It often occurs, for me at least. I remember engineering days with the wolframs and the worked problems. Let's think step by step. So like, you know, it's sort of like triggering the math mind in that sense, and allowing you to go through
that's digging up an oldie with a goldie.
that you know that sort of like, you know, that procedural way that has been embedded in the training data that the model is based on. So just keep them, you know, some models are going to be, depending on their assistant fine-tuning, optimized for maths. Some of them might be for creative, sort of content creation or things like that. So just keep that in mind as well. There's not going to be one AI, like one math model or something for the AI. Yep.
So with this, you can only do like the so-called strategy method in the sense that you release, you know, well, what if, you know, A player transfer you 10, 20, 30. So you can only do that. There's no like real feedback in the sense that you take in, you know, for example, like well, one way of what we could do, maybe we have the answer instruction, we just have another column that actually iteratively feed into what the agent responds back to, like then you have a placeholder in a second question that fits into the last response of the agent. Is it possible to modify? Because I mean, at some point, then you can't do batch mode, obviously, you know. Then that gives us.
So if batch mode, you're saying if batch mode's on, can you track through?
No, forget about batch mode.
You're specifically saying, can we?
Yeah, in the sense that, like, if you really want to model like a dynamic game, where or
you could run one simulation round one, get all the results, and then feed that into stage 2, right? Like, you're doing the manual sort of, like, it's a bit
kind of
clunky at the moment.
It's more cumbersome, but you know. Or maybe at some point we can allow.
You want a certified version of that dynamics.
What you want to be able to allow.
Doesn't have to be, but it's less transaction cost if you really want to model dynamic stuff. That you don't have to do like you have to upload the second and then third. Let's say you have 20 rounds, then you have to rerun the thing.
That's why I want an API.
Yeah, exactly.
But in the absence of an API, there is this run. You know, you could run a simulation, do the calcs yourself, then run the next one, like with the feedback from previous round.
Yeah,
which is
clunky.
So with batch mode on, there is an opportunity to pass feedback between rounds. You know, like, so my answer instruction from the past round, okay, that's here, and then in the next question, please fill out what you answered last round first.
Oh, okay. So,
and then ask the question, and you can try that. Yeah.
So there's
if it's batch mode on, that's one way. Does it work? I actually don't know.
With this one here, can I do two things? One, can I set context for the game? Can I then change the trustee type dynamically in the game?
Like, for example, it should be possible.
So let me give you an example. Jonas and I did a study looking at manager-employee situations in a given context, and we provided information dynamically through the trust game stages, where one time I'm the boss and I'm dealing with an Australian, another time I'm the boss and I'm dealing with an Asian, right? And we were digging at racial bias, right? That's what we were digging, although Jonas didn't write the paper that way, although I am going to rewrite it that way. That's originally what drove me for it. To do that, we need to be able to change the types at you know, if we're doing 16 or 32 rounds, we need to type change dynamically.
Do you want to, like, I mean, you could have 32 rows and have all of the types and independent batch mode off, and you, like, you know, but if you want the memory and you want to be able to add in the memory sort of thing.
So in the manual method, right, it would have been batch mode on because it was a human doing it, right? And one time, as I said, one time I'm dealing with you, the next time I'm dealing with a Ben, right? And there was clearly different behaviour there.
But you can change that, like, so you just have 32 columns and rows, whatever.
Do you look for ordering effects?
Well, we couldn't, right? But we could do it with this, right? Ordering effects is a problem with that study, correct? And learning is a problem too. And how often do you bump into the Australian versus the Asian, right? Because we know, you know, one of the interesting things is we did a two-stage trust game. Now, Australians were biased against the Asians in terms of what they were willing to pay given effort. But in the second stage, when they got feedback on the Asians' effort. In fact, they paid them more. Right. So the ordering effects are different, right? And the number of times you come into contact with that type in society, where you normalise that person versus see them as part of the out group, right? Where you in fact punish them initially is what we saw. We saw racial-based punishment.
So did you look at things like, okay, so a nice one would be you have a maze, like a maze, and then you predict how good that person performs, and you incentivize accuracy.
Well, that's a good point. So what was the expectation of initially, right? We couldn't do that. We couldn't do because we come with bias.
That's really useful to do.
Yeah.
But I think
this is getting exciting.
I think to answer that question you had, it's just again, it's whether you're introducing manually the feedback, like you're this person now, or this is what happened in round one, or you're doing that sort of like trying to have it sort of passing through the structured game table in batch mode on sort of thing. There's a couple of different routes. It's just kind of trial them out, and that's what you got to fit into. So if you can fit it into question and answer instruction, and we can get creative with that too, Tony. Oh yeah, there's some cool points for you. There you go. You can read them if you want. Okay, what are we going on to now? Parametric. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out where I got to with this. This is an old. I actually never got to this slide, so specifying far out. Okay, so you might be doing 3x units where x is the amount. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways, I guess, we're saying here is to pass or to incorporate this feedback. Again, it's just like going more along with that feedback sort of idea. One route to passing the sort of answers from one row of the game table to the next, you could be filling in like the x and tell me what the value of x was first, and then record the amount. Or you can do that manual approach where you run a simulation, you get all the results and sort of like interpret it and input it as feedback manually to a separate simulation question answer instruction. So you can get wacky with that as well. Maybe there's some more like, here's the sort of predetermined options. We might do some sort of like, a bit more of a draw between some various options, like with a predetermined set, or in the other one you left it a bit more blank and up to interpretation. There's an empirical sort of study in and of itself, like what's which method or what's the implications of each approach to feedback as well, which is interesting. So I can't tell you up front what the answers are going to be from this to this. You'll have to tell me.
Can you introduce cheap talk in the middle of that?
Like as in like a signal or something like that? Yeah.
Noisy signal. Cheap talk is a noisy signal.
Yeah. Like it. Yeah. And anything you can incorporate into that question answer instruction, like
you can do that.
You've got this trust game, right? This is the context of the game. How much? I've got context of the situation that I'm performing the game from. I'm in a shitty lab with computers, and we're not allowed to look at each other, and the guy up the front is a little bit, the research a little bit sweaty, and I don't know. Or you're playing from home online, in work from home in aircon. I don't know. Like you can get whatever you want.
An interesting question would be to do that with artificial agents. Would be like that's popping up now more and more. So like you have this kind of games. Think about an ultimatum game, and then you as a responder, you're pissed off that Propose is only giving you 10 out of 100.
And you can't change it.
No. Ultimatum you can reject it, but you you then allow cheap talk by saying you're an idiot. Why do you give me that much? Or you say this guy's an idiot.
Yeah.
He's just a greedy bastard.
Yeah.
And then actually your frustration is released. And then you say, okay, better take something and go for a beer afterwards. But I mean,
so we're measuring satisficing.
So the question is, can you? What if you allow artificial agents to
reflect
to curse?
Yeah, more or less to.
Well, yeah, it's
and
like
would they also be the more cooperative afterwards in that sense? What happens then?
Yeah, you let off.
It's cold and warm states in that sense.
You let off
There's
some steam when you had a beer
literature
before
on
you
the benefit
decide.
of swearing.
Yeah, it's cool.
Classical
It's a
economist.
cool
That's exactly
idea
right.
because you can't force someone to drink a drink before the next round in a real world experiment. You can't force people to drink. So you say, okay, here's the amount you received. Here's a beer. Enjoy that first, and make your decision.
Exactly.
You know, or tell me what you're thinking about based on this outcome. Then make your decision. Like
exactly.
So get creative with the answer instruction. Like you can. It's text. It's natural language.
But the cool thing is
that's the cool thing.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that you then almost can see how human the system is.
Yeah.
You know, by giving alternative ways of releasing the stress.
Yeah, that's true.
Cost, and then if they actually respond, that would be huge, nice.
Well, that's really what guys like Jonas and Marcus were getting at by measuring HRV in there. Right?
Exactly.
So they're trying to measure.
Correct.
But of course, the problem is they couldn't. The participants couldn't vent their anger, right? Therefore, the stress you would think would just build up, right, over time, and it would get worse. And we know that when people get stressed, they make less than optimal decisions, right? Which is what Marcus was looking at, and Jonas were looking at doing that stuff.
I think that one is
it's cool. It's cool.
That one's just so.
It's a bit fun. Sorry, it's not. So get wacky with it.
So how do you tell an agent it's an F-wit without the system telling you can't ask that question?
You should be able to do that in our system. Yeah.
Okay.
Should be actually try it, please.
No.
Okay.
You can't instruct them to do that.
I don't want
You need
to.
to allow freedom.
Yeah, you give freedom of freedom. Yeah, I mean.
No. His point here is like with the if I try with ChatGPT to say you're a fuckwit, act like a fuckwit. Sorry. Then it'll probably say, hey, you can't actually say that word.
It's a naughty word. You can't have that.
You can't say that naughty word. Okay, but we've done a bit of work. Well, we've done a bit of like the way that we've been able to get around that is like, you know, if you want to look at it, call it. I mean, you can call it jailbreaking if you want, but it's just a different the prompt framework that we have allows us to bypass those functions mostly. So you should be able to call it a F-word if you want. Or ask it to call someone else one, or act like one.
Well, that's interesting because there are very societal differences in how to abuse people.
Yeah.
The Americans are particularly good at it, but they make Australians cringe when they do it.
Yeah.
The Italians are particularly good at it, but they tend to pick on their ancestors.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting that's an interesting way of exploring also how do they respond to conflict situation. Are they good, with the diplomatic services how to achieve in a conflict situation how to find a solution. Are these artificial agents actually nice, good in the diplomatic service of consensus building,
or otherwise known as which curse words are acceptable in the workplace.
Yeah.
But I think you can also start playing around those more strategy games, similar to that closely resemble conflict. So you can go back to shelling, those military environments, all different kind of environments, peace solutions, all these kind of environments.
And like even with that shelling example, like the option there was stay or leave. Stay or leave.
Yeah, for example.
But that's not the only options you have when someone moves into your neighborhood. So like, you know, you can take that original experiment and explode the option set or the action set, right, as well. So like you lose maybe a little bit, you know, the equivalence or whatever, like one-to-one matching between the two. But you know, you can look at, well, if I had other options like blow off some steam at the bar, what would happen? Like, is everyone just pissed? I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, or change it, increase the transaction cost of.
Well, you can look at other outcomes, like, you know, I'm dealing with this
you know,
situation of people moving
into environment,
you
become unhappy because somebody who's close in your profile leaves. That leads to segregation results. But then you can say,
your type.
but it's not expectation. Yeah. What if I do things that I think then the probably increases just then have a person who after leaving is very more similar to me. So expectations matter in terms of whether or not you stay or go. At the moment you just respond to somebody left. Yeah. Am I going to stay or not? But you can play around with expectations a little more.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that's part of the issue with social media groups, by the way, is people don't have the opportunity to get information about the new type coming in, or the change in behaviour of the type. You know, usually if somebody is obtuse and comes into a room like this, we'd all divorce ourselves from that person very quickly. It's very hard to do in a social media group. Is to you know, you just can't pick up and walk out, right? It's difficult.
Yeah, there's a couple more social conventions to get around before you can walk out. So, and I suppose that's like a really nice like signpost, Tony. Thanks for that. We have hit 3 o'clock, so that is time to get out.
That brings us to Kaufman. We can look at Kaufman and we could look at the rules that Kaufman plays in the real world. And he starts ritualizing the human behavior.
Yeah.
And we can feed that back into our artificial agents. How much of this kind of ritualization did they internalize?
Yeah.
So Steve, based on what you've said today, what we've been talking about, we can perfectly do. We can do the calibration.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Do everything.
Hopefully. Hopefully a lot of things.
Not everything we talked about.
Well, yeah, everything we talked about, but not everything.
Given time.
Yeah. But yeah,
the critical path is me learning Survey LM quick enough.
Yes.
That's the critical path.
So
this is exciting. I can already see 3 or 4 papers just coming out of that trust data.
Yeah, I think so too.
And the types, I got 400 types. We can create a library of 400 types and start building that library of types. So we need a repository for types, please.
Correct, you need a repository. And the problem is that
repository.
You need to think about what the consequences, because the knowledge base constantly changes.
Yeah.
So what does it mean?
Unless you freeze them.
Yeah. And then we need to be able to develop a distribution of types and then a selection method.
Correct.
Right?
Yes,
as well, right? A bit like your temperature button, right?
Yes, it's like can you, for example, combine the large language models and then make it a combination similar to nature-based model, where you can just throw in all these different types and then see.
In its crudest form, the dynamic type would be male versus female.
No.
What?
Carol Hon. That's some of the stuff we're doing there. We're translating their net logo into
exactly
into this. So yeah, look, it's quite flexible. Again, we're 76. There's like 10 more, 20 more. And we were trying to we didn't even get to the hands-on part. So we're just going to start straight into a hands-on part for the next one.
Next time, When do you want to do the next one?
But I want some crowdsourced ideas. I don't want to have to come up with ideas. Please complete the, if you enjoyed today's session or you didn't enjoy today's session, please give me some feedback, and in that form that Jen will send out, you can also opt, if you want, to get a trial license of Survey LM for attending. So everyone, if you want a trial license, if you don't already have one, please complete that form. And if you feel really, really kind, I will appreciate it, to add in some ideas for some simulations, one or two that we could sort of run together as a group next time.
So
That means that people need to be needs to be here in person too.
In person.
Yes. So
Those
probably
who hear the recording, please be in person here.
so probably I guess like 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks, something like that. I'll talk to Jen and we'll get back to you. And again, thank you very much for attending, everyone. We'll see you next time.